Hello everybody, welcome to Moorepay's webinar on the 5 killer insights to boost your status as the employer of choice. Now this webinar is based on the back of our recent very popular HR report. My name is Molly Ackland and I'm our Content and Communications Manager here at Moorepay. So we've got a lot to pack in today's session, so we're going to get straight into the agenda for this afternoon. So after a little bit of housekeeping, I'll introduce you to the panel of experts with us today. Then I'll outline the premise of the report and we'll reveal the 5 headline findings, and our experts will share some context behind each of the stats to help you boost your status as the employer of choice. We'll then go into the live Q&A section of the webinar, so you'll be able to ask our panellists any burning questions you may have. And then we'll go through a little bit about how to access the full report and some other helpful resources as well. So if you're wondering how to ask a question, to ask our experts a question in the Q&A, please use the GoToWebinar question panel. We'll do our very best to answer as many questions as we can at the end. And please don't worry too much if you're facing technical difficulties, as we will send everyone the recording after the webinar. So a little bit about us for anyone who may be new here. Moorepay have been around for nearly 60 years now, and our mission is to make payroll and HR easy. For all of these reasons on the screen is why our customers choose us, from our secure technology to our trusted team of experts and our industry awards, including Payroll Service Provider of the Year Award with the CIPP. And this is how we do it. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about us, then please do let me know in the chat, or there's a pop-up survey at the end where you can put in your details and I'll get one of my colleagues to get in touch with you. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our panellists today. Firstly, we have Anthony Vollmer joining us, who is the Managing Director at Moorepay. We have Sarah Dowsall, who is our Chief Operating Officer at Natural HR, Patrick Cunningham, who is Head of HR Operations for Moorepay, and finally Helen McGowan, who is Zellis Learning and Development Business Partner. So I'm going to let our panellists take the stage and just give you a little bit of insight into their background and current roles. And I'll hand over to Anthony first.
Great, thank you, Molly. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. So I'm Anthony. I'm the Managing Director of Moorepay, and I've had the privilege of leading the team here for the last 5 years. Prior to that, I ran Tesco Mobile and PlusNet, so worked in the telecom space. Confession is I am not an HR professional. I'm a kind of, I guess, what you'd call a general manager with a sort of range of experience across a whole set of different business functions. But in my current role, I do lead a team of expert HR and payroll professionals who deliver our services and also develop our software. So I've learned a lot over the last 5 years about not just from a general management point of view, how to get the best out of your people and in particular HR teams and HR tech, but also more broadly about the profession. So very much looking forward to today's session, and I'll hand over to Sarah.
Thank you, Anthony. Good afternoon. My name's Sarah Dowsall. I'm the COO and co-founder of Natural HR, and we were acquired by Moorepay just over a year ago. So I started Natural HR back in 2012, so it's been quite a long journey running a business, but also wearing the hat of the standalone person responsible for HR within a growing and scaling business. And I'll hand over to Patrick.
Thanks, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Patrick, and I am the Head of HR Operations here at Moorepay. And I lead a cross-functional team of experts and consultants who deliver some of our finest advice to all our clients. My background is in practice. I worked for over 15 years in human resources management in a variety of sectors, but predominantly in the legal sector. And I'm here today, and I will be talking about a couple of different topics, in particular about AI and pay and reward. And I'll pass it over to Helen.
Thanks, Patrick. Afternoon, everybody. Hope that you're well. My name's Helen McGowan, and I'm part of the Central Learning and Development team at Zellis Group and support Moorepay in their learning and development. I've worked here for just over 4 years now, but within the learning and development world for almost 20 years. I specialise now in leadership and management development, and have been a manager in a past life as well. So really excited to be able to share our insights this afternoon with you. Molly, back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. So just going to give a little bit of a brief introduction to this report. So this year was actually the first year that we have run Moorepay's HR Trends Survey, and we're really delighted to report that we had over 600 respondents to the survey. We began it because we're passionate about keeping our customers up to date and in the know. And this webinar is essentially intended to help you to digest our key findings, to better understand what's happening across the HR profession. It'll also give you the opportunity to hear the opinions of thought leaders in the industry and ask them any questions you might have. So we do intend to continue the report annually to discover year-on-year trends as well as what's on the horizon. And a little bit of methodology behind the survey. So we collected 644 responses in total from HR professionals. The survey we conducted was using an online form, so we used SurveyMonkey for that, and then we promoted that to our contacts and the HR Grapevine subscribers by email as well. So the respondents, as you can see here on the right, they range from they're a range of business sizes, so from over 1 to over 10,000 employees, and a variety of industries. Their job titles include HR consultants, directors, business partners, and advisors. So let's get into it. So our first headline finding is strategy and leadership is the top priority for 2024. So over 20% of UK businesses named strategy and leadership as their main priority for this year. Employee experience and wellness seems to sit in second place, which means that it's still a big focus for businesses too. And learning and development falls closely behind in the priority list, with just a small percentage of businesses choosing areas such as compensation, benefits and reward, and performance management. And interestingly, less than 5% of businesses are choosing to focus on equality, diversity and inclusion this year. So we'll start off with our first question, which is for Anthony. What key strategies and leadership qualities should organisations focus on to drive success this year?
Thank you very much, Molly. And I suppose my reflection when I looked at this, the results to this question were that, you know, it's not a surprise that strategy and leadership falls to the top, as the question asks, what's the main priority? But it is interesting to see the order of the different answers below strategy and leadership, because many of these things represent choices that all of you are making, and HR teams and businesses more broadly are making around where to invest time and resources to improve what you do today. If I just dwell on strategy and leadership, I mean, strategy itself obviously is always key. Every organisation, every business that we all work in is always in a kind of perpetual state of judging how to develop their strategy, what's working, what's not. Ultimately, it all boils down to, as we all know, to choices. It's not possible to do everything, so it's about understanding what the choices are and making clean decisions as a business to commit or not to commit to things, and then allocating resources properly to follow through, and that's a lot easier said than done, again, as we all know. I think if I think about this from a general management perspective, and then how I work with HR leaders and how I've seen other sort of general manager leaders work with HR teams, and again, you will all have plenty of experience of this. The more that the HR leader and the HR team in general can understand the strategic choices that a business is making in terms of which customers to target and why, with which products or services, how that company is trying to differentiate itself, what the operational strategy choices, the more context the HR team have, the better will be the choices that they're able to make to support the delivery of that strategy. So for example, people strategy choices around what's the capacity of the organization, the current organization, to deliver a strategy, where is investment needed, either in new roles or in training, where is change most, where is the need for change most acute, how will that be achieved? And crucially, and often not talked about so much, is where is the business accepting that it's not going to change anything? And often that's some of the hardest decisions to make, are where you're actually saying, well, this part of the business, maybe we do want to change, but the priority isn't as high as it is for another area. And being explicit about that can be really helpful. The more of that context that you'll have as an HR professional within an organization, the more effective, the more context you have on the overall strategy, the more effective your choices will be below that, and the better leaders you will be. And I think what's striking about the sort of the ranking, if you will, of the points underneath, employee experience, learning and development, and so on, is of course all those things are very important, and we'll come on and talk about those as we go through the webinar. I just wanted to draw out a couple of thoughts on these. So particularly on employee experience and wellness, understanding what our employees think, your employees think, is obviously key, and that's been something that good organizations have done for decades and decades. Regularly measuring it and knowing where the kind of the pulse of the organization is, if you will, is one thing. Acting on it, as we all know, and having that follow through of you said, we did, and again being choiceful about what is it that the organization can respond to and is in a position to deliver against, rather than make promises that you can't stand behind. It is the really hard part of this. We'll talk a bit more about that later, but it ultimately boils down to how do you make choices and focus. It's similar with learning and development. Core to every company is how we develop the skills and experience of our people. And I think probably over the years, the phrase "it's never been more important to develop skills and experience of people" has been trotted out. It does feel like that will always be the case, and the rate of change, and Patrick will come on and talk about AI as one area, but there are many other areas. The rate of change of technology and capabilities that technology can bring to organizations means that working out where to invest in L&D and how to train people to make the most of those is obviously critical. However, and I won't steal Helen's thunder, good old-fashioned management leadership in terms of how developing people into good managers, I believe, still remains one of the most impactful things you can do as an organization. Just before we talk about a couple of others, I did also just want to touch on communication, which again, in my experience, is for strategy and leadership, is part of the jigsaw puzzle, which often comes at the end of a lot of hard work on determining what a strategy is. But can be one of the most impactful things when done well, but again takes a lot of time and energy to get right. Having every organization generally has a vision, or a mission around what they're seeking to achieve, what their goals are. Turning that into something that's simple and easy to communicate without it frankly becoming jingoistic and something that people kind of look through rather than absorb can take a lot of time, but is time very well spent, because once you've got that solidified in an organization, it can really stand the test of time and be a rallying cry for everybody around helping you explain why the company is making the choices that it is, even if those choices are broader business choices that you might not feel that close to yourself. A clear vision and a clear set of goals can help you articulate why the business is deciding to do A and not B. And obviously values, company values, form another key part of that. And for instance, values that bring out areas of, things that are particularly important for people's development, whether that's learning, whether that is their employee experience. Again, I've found very effective at aligning the interests of the colleagues in an organisation, the employees, to what the overall organisation is trying to achieve. So to summarise, I would say strategy and leadership by their nature are always going to be crucial. In some respects, you would always expect to see them at the top of the list. But questions to think about are how to shape the strategy itself. So as an HR professional, how to be part of that strategy development process for the overall organisation. The more you're part of that strategy development process, the more you'll have the context to then make the best choices in terms of how you and your team allocate their time and resources, very precious time and resources, to the things that will be most impactful for the organisation from a people point of view. The last thing I wanted to just cover quickly was just to bring in Sarah, just to talk about ED&I, because I think we were both a bit surprised to see this right at the bottom of the list. And again, it made me think about sort of the relative priorities of organisations in a period where it is always necessary to make choices now, but perhaps particularly acute given many of the cost pressures that lots of organisations are experiencing. Sarah, just bringing you in on this, what was your perspective on this?
So I was quite surprised, Anthony, and it coincides actually with something I was reading online in HR magazine. It was only just released last week to say there's been some research and analysis carried out, and the post is called Limited Progression on Racial Inclusion Targets. A company who specialises in comparison around DE&I, a website called Window, I believe it's pronounced, have actually found that just 18 out of 500 global companies have made significant improvements in workforce representation. So actually, if I look at our survey of 600 respondents and look at what's happening very timely in the HR news on a global level, actually I do think there is something really in this. The UK were looked at as well, and a few companies were identified that we would associate as big companies, HSBC, Deloitte, as actually making really positive change. But it's made me question what is going on in both the local and global landscape. And I do think this is one for the HR and business leader watch list for 2024 to ensure that we do see progression. And I'll hand back over.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I agree. I think, as with so many of these things, it's about relative priorities, isn't it, for people? So I'd be very interested in people's questions and views on this. My instinct is everyone recognises it is important. It's just, how do you find the time and the space to really move this point forward amongst everything else that a team is dealing with day to day? Molly, I'll hand back to you.
Brilliant. That was really insightful. Thank you so much, Anthony, and thank you, Sarah, for your input there as well. Thank you. We will move over to the second headline finding now, which is nearly a quarter of businesses are planning to use generative AI in the next 12 months. So really interestingly here, when we asked HR professionals if they were currently using generative AI in their department, almost 90% said that they weren't. However, nearly a quarter of businesses said that they do plan to use it in the next 12 months. So examples of this include AI generated job descriptions, screening CVs, employee engagement via chatbots, interview scheduling, and managing data and reporting as well. So we've got a question here for Patrick. Patrick, how should businesses strategically implement generative AI to maximise its benefits and address potential challenges in the next year?
And thank you, Molly, and thank you to everyone who's joined today. It's a really good question, and I think just kind of looking at the data set feedback, it's not quite surprising to see the level of current use of generative AI in the workplace, more in particular with HR. I think that reflects upon maybe kind of the elements of understanding the strategy and implementation, and then kind of breaking it down to quite simply, where can it be used well? As Molly just outlined, there's a couple of examples there about strategies of implementation, about what it could be used for. But again, you know, those things are areas which probably we could look at a bit broader later on, but I'd probably just want to kind of focus on the kind of gap between what's happening now and obviously in the future. If you look over the next 12 months, it looks like HR are going to be using AI a lot more. So, you know, if that's the case, then how are we going to start to apply that effectively? So I think key things is, you know, strategically looking at the rules. I think you have to start with a policy. If you know the rules and you can provide that in a very easy and manageable way, this will then help supply your employees with a bit of clarity around that. And that focuses on a couple of things really. And you could call them sort of road rules, if you will, about setting your position as a company and the philosophy around the use of AI, you know, considering what type of AI you want to use it and what type of validation, accuracy, you know, is it for efficiencies? What is the purpose? And I think that's kind of really key to kind of consider when you're starting out writing a policy or a process about AI within the wider practice, not just within HR. And I think one of the kind of key things there is consider the culture of your business, reflected in your values. Are you a business looking at initiative and curiosity and sort of that kind of innovation across your kind of products or what you deliver? Or is it that you would look at it going as in, we're really kind of focusing on providing a solid employee experience. We want to build upon our internal values. So having those kind of building blocks of a policy, I think, are really, really crucial in starting out, even before you want to apply HR within a business. When you kind of got those kind of initial structures, it sort of forms itself, right? Okay, where are we going to apply this? So looking at a policy, the rules, communicating it. And I think that's a crucial one. With many, many policies, as we know, we write them, we create them and craft them for a reason. But going above and beyond is probably something that maybe needs to be considered when looking at AI use within a business, because it has such an ethical guidance and kind of mandate around it that it would be kind of crucial to include something like that. I think helping your employees understand the need for compliance with these policies, responsible usage, and crucially, how to speak up if things are not going right. You know, we've all heard some horror stories over the last 12 months about AI and potential biases from some of the largest businesses in the world. So, you know, having those built in and allowing your employees to be a part of that process is one step. If we look at where we can apply that in a business, I think we've had, just like any critical changes in recent years with HR has built itself upon applying software in a variety of different formats, from human capital management systems to the way we apply leave and structure our businesses. So we're not unused to kind of using this kind of software, in particular any software. So how do we kind of use that data to sort of collate data-driven analysis and decisions in HR? I think one of the kind of key things we've seen recently is looking at an area where in your own business, where you're facing barriers, you need some strategies to overcome it. Is it an inefficient process? Is it very admin heavy and taking a lot of time? So I think that can cover lots of things, as Molly outlined: job descriptions, people, data, trying to automate that information, provide that for your people plan, looking at workflows and HR admin. Where are those pitfalls where it just sucks the time out of the people team? I think one of the kind of key ones you're seeing recently, and very, very recently, even yesterday, is recruitment. Recruitment is absorbing this in a different way than some of the other areas within HR. And why is that? Well, I think it's probably twofold. I think recruitment predominantly is an administratively heavy burden on a HR team or recruitment teams. And I think there's a recent emergence yesterday with HMRC using AI to recruit customer service roles purely through AI. and that was both focused on a text-based statement and a pre-recorded video with no human interaction. I suppose that kind of poses two questions, really, doesn't it? It reduces that element of heavy administration. But what does it kind of deliver on that point? Well, I think you could quite easily argue that there is maybe an ethical dilemma in recruiting, not speaking to a human during that process. But again, you could say likewise that having AI within a recruitment process, if balanced with the right policies and procedures, could remove bias within recruitment. And I think that is quite a great tool that could obviously eliminate what has probably been long held as many issues within recruitment, which is getting over unconscious bias. And I think that kind of leads on a little bit from Sarah's point about the low progress in EDI. How could we use AI to support the priorities of HR within a different way? Recently there was a research by Oxford University stating that still white British origin candidates had a 9% more positive responses for employers. So it shows there's a long way to go in still kind of building out AI's ethical uses, but again, the potential for using it very well. And I think kind of touching upon that about how it looks from the employees, we've still got to keep people at the center of anything you're using within AI. It's imperative that there's that kind of involvement, like I said, through the policies, through the feedback, providing those fundamental assurances that as we've heard those sensationalized headlines recently that AI is going to take over the world and people are going to lose their jobs, there's always going to be that kind of fear factor amongst that. And I suppose kind of we look at it from a kind of data protection point of view, the trustworthiness, there's still some work to be going there across businesses and the wider UK government and the landscape about the legislation around it. So there's still little room for kind of development there. I suppose maybe that reflects in the kind of percentage of HR professionals taking up AI at the moment, because there's no kind of dedicated legal kind of principles around that. If we look at how one of the kind of high profile cases recently with Google, again, that shows and demonstrates that even the biggest businesses struggle with this. Kind of quickly touching on the regulatory landscape about this, there's not a lot of government clarity about how this should be governed. There is no specific laws and legislation. There is a principle guidance at the moment which focuses around best practice. So that's a really good one to focus on, looking at the principles of transparency, fairness, safety, contestability, as we talked about, and accountability. And that's probably kind of a key takeaway from this is it's not going away. This is like any other software that's happened before. It's developing. There will be rules and principles within the government. But again, prepping your own teams and your own businesses and building frameworks, building the right policies, and probably more fundamentally is deciding which areas within the business you want to place that AI in and what benefits that provides your employees as well as the business. Thank you. I'll pass that to Molly.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patrick. Really interesting there. And I think AI is something that a lot of people are scared of, but it's, it's been around for a while now. And I think, as you say, there's a lot of benefits that are outlined, and it's just using it to your advantage and using it properly and getting the best out of it, really. So thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on to headline number 3. Now this one is a whopping third of businesses don't use surveys to measure their employee engagement. So for the businesses that said that they do use surveys, almost 40% reported that their employee engagement scored the same each year, with 8% reporting a decline since the previous year. Now positively, over half of businesses reported an increase in their employee engagement overall. So Sarah is going to take this the lead on this section. So Sarah, what are benefits of using surveys and how can businesses factor them into their engagement strategy?
Thanks, Molly. So surveys such as EMPS, they're really beneficial tools for providing businesses with insight into each employee's wants, needs, concerns, and the things they're happy about and what your business is doing well. And I think it's really important to mention that point, because sometimes we can actually be unaware of what's working well and what employees actually value before we go off making any changes that might be detrimental. But then we have been collected the other side, so the concerns, the areas for improvement, and overall it means you're collating a lot of data that you can then analyse in terms of groups, whether that might be by department or by manager, to look at are there any specific insights you can draw from that, or even just overall understanding and measure across your whole business, being able to baseline that, monitor it, track it over time as you hopefully work towards improvements. Having that data then means you're making informed decisions on the strategies you can implement to increase that employee engagement, which in turn means that businesses then reap the benefits of a much happier, more productive workforce, and ultimately a more successful business. So Molly, as part of preparing for this webinar today, we reviewed some research carried out by Acuity Training, which found that 1 in 6 employees are unhappy at work and they're looking for a new job. So surveys would be a really good starting point for understanding the employee sentiment, loyalty, by asking some questions around this and looking at then what you can put in place to help address that. Surveys might be the best way to spur employee engagement, and I am a real advocate of being a really good starting place. But there are other strategies you might want to consider, such as promoting two-way communication, recognising good work, or even investing in personal growth. Overall, I'd say it comes down to tracking employee engagement, and the foundation is the HR software that your employees want to then engage with, and we're here to help with that. Moorepay's employee engagement software drives company culture and communications through one centralised place and gives employees a platform to have a voice in your business. It means you can then drive proactive change by listening to what your employees are telling you. Now, if you're sitting there thinking that all sounds great, Sarah, but actually we're not using surveys, we've never done any EMPS, I don't know what to do or even how to get buy-in, that's okay. And I think this is confession time. So I was in that group of 1/3 of businesses not using surveys to understand employee engagement at the time at which we were required. And before I elaborate on my confession story, I think it would be good to have in mind, as part of prepping for today, I've looked at, well, what are the key blockers to businesses, to HR teams, to actually introducing surveys or EMPS tools? And what I found is that they tend to be time and effort. So the time and effort of setting up surveys, tools, administering such a scheme, unsure of what questions to actually ask employees, concerns about low participation rates and how that might look if you're not getting that much feedback, and then how you act on it, and the cost of addressing any employee feedback. And I'd say this is a big one, and I'm sure many of us can relate to budget challenges and concerns around that. So having that in mind, I'll get into my story and I'll try and keep it as brief as possible. And this is the way I had actually attempted a couple of surveys in the past, and the way I approached it was viewing it as something to do annually, you know, an annual employee engagement survey. How are people feeling? It came from a place of good intention, looking at what change we could put in place. And I do recall spending quite a few weeks prepping in terms of what questions should I be asking, how should I structure the survey, looking online, asking other people if I could have copies of their survey to see what they were doing. Once I got them rolled out the survey, it was then on me to go through that feedback, understand, you know, what are some ideas we can put forward to the board, what are the costs associated with that, and getting some buy-in to make that change happen. So at the first few times we did that, actually, it was relatively easy to drive change that people were looking for. I'd say it's very employee benefit centric. So I was able to increase holidays, enhance sick pay. And then as we were coming out of COVID, I was starting to think, actually, I don't know how I'm going to keep this going, because it's becoming almost like an expectation of increasing employee benefits that I don't think I can sustain from a budget business perspective my main priority was, navigating the business through a tricky period, as I'm sure was the case for many. And that ultimately meant that we just thought, right, okay, let's park that. After our acquisition just over a year ago, we've now been moved into the Zellis Group EMPS cycle, and that runs on a quarterly basis. So I thought it would be ideal just to show, what I've learned actually from where I started and what's happening now in the business and what I've taken away from it. And I'd say that the concerns that I set out to start with have probably all been addressed by what I've seen and learned over the last year, and those boxes are being ticked. And what I've found is actually it's not just on, the HR function. It was, on me alone in a small business, but actually the way it's delivered across the whole group. This is a line manager and senior leadership responsibility for EMPS and employee engagement is the way that it's done. So there's a real drive on managing the ownership within line managers and leadership teams and driving engagement in that area, making sure that feedback is addressed and that plans are put in place to action that. The other thing that surprised me is actually the level of question is not like how I'd kind of thought about it, and it's more broader, looking at people's work, how they how closely they understand the organisational values, goals, their thoughts around managers, leadership, their overall loyalty within the business. So it's broken down into various different areas, and actually what that's all driving towards is that the change I've actually seen over the last year doesn't necessarily cost real monetary value. It's the feedback you're getting, such as, things I've picked up is where we had a really good cadence of one-to-ones being delivered and documented in some areas of the business, but as we'd grown, not all areas that had filtered down, really simple stuff that actually we could look at that feedback and just act on, pretty much straight away through local plans, looking at the business areas and going out to managers and saying, okay, this is an area for us to look at. And like I said, it wasn't about, how much is that going to cost to put something in place to address. So it's really insightful. The other thing I found is actually it was a really good source of feedback to managers, being able to say where they are doing a good job, what their employees are feeding back is working well, and being able to look at that and how we do more of that in the business. So in summary, all of the concerns I'd say have been addressed through a more regular cadence, wider buy-in, so it's not just sitting with HR as a function to act on, and looking at really what it is that people are asking for, not cost driven. So I'll pass back to you, Molly.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really interesting, and thank you so much for touching on your personal experience there as well. Yeah, very, very interesting to hear. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to headline number 4, which is training managers is the top L&D priority this year. So in our report, over 70% of respondents selected manager training as their top priority for learning and development this year. So personalised learning paths and soft skills followed behind as top priority for some businesses. And interestingly, only a small percentage of businesses have chosen things like mentoring programs, digital skills, or data and analytical skills as their top priority for L&D in 2024. So Helen, could you talk about what kind of specific knowledge, skills and behaviours should training include for managers?
Absolutely, thanks Molly. Firstly, I mean, it absolutely excites me that learning and development is in the top priorities. First of all, it gives me great reassurance. It's certainly in the role that I do, but also I think there's no surprise there, because if we've listened and what we've heard from Sarah, from Patrick, from Anthony, learning and development really kind of gives the foundation to all of the things that we've already talked about, we've already heard about. And without that focus, without that dedication, that investment to all colleagues, but specifically in this report, thinking about training our managers, it's very hard to do any of those things if we are not making that investment, if we are not supporting our line managers, our people managers in how do I actually do some of the stuff that we've talked about? How do I read an EMPS and actually, most importantly, how do I act on that and do something with that information? How do I support the change around AI? How do I lead and get people on that journey with me? So I think specific knowledge, skills and behaviours is always a really tricky one. And obviously there will be differences between organisations, but for me, if I was to pull out some highlights and I guess some core fundamental pieces, I'd split it into two for definite. And I think that those what we would call manager essentials, the real foundation pieces that support managers in their day-to-day, weekly, monthly, regular cadence of activities that as a line manager makes you the very best line manager, people manager that you can actually be. And to Sarah's point earlier, thinking about things like really great one-to-ones with team members, thinking about actually how do I have that regular cadence of one-to-ones and make it something very different from just a task list review or a checklist of have you done this, have you done that. Things like difficult conversations and delivering feedback, both positive and constructive feedback, are kind of, if you like, in that kit bag for managers. And interestingly, when we look at the priorities and also look at the top priorities within learning and development, again, things like performance management, one of our, I guess, our key regular activities within the learning and development team here is making sure that not only are our new managers supported, so they are really clear on not just what they need to do, but how they do that. How do we have those great conversations? How do I coach my team, for example? So we're giving them the what, but we're also giving them the how. The other part within that is when we think about employer of choice, there's a couple of pieces here for me that I think sometimes there's this given that managers either just should know what to do because they're a manager, they've been promoted into that role, or they've been in that role for a significant amount of time and therefore should be a good manager. And if you were completely honest, and again, if I'm completely honest around my experience working in learning, it isn't always the case. Sometimes we've got people in managerial positions because they were great and SMEs in their role, but the people side of it is something that is a challenge for them. So investing into, as I say, the regular cadence, making sure that new managers are supported, they know what to do from the outset, so that we really are setting them up for success, and making sure that on a regular cycle we're coming back to those things. So part of what we do here at Zellis is every 6 months, as part of our performance review cycle, we make sure that we repeat the trainings, we repeat those sessions on how to deliver great feedback, how to have a great career conversation, for example, how to hold a one-to-one and how to hold a performance review. They are, if you like, always on the agenda. The second part then that I want to touch on, and I guess this is more tapping into how do you differentiate yourself from other organisations, from other businesses, where you could just say some of those manager essentials hopefully are just part of the package, part of that learning and development package. And I think for me this comes back to what kind of themes are coming through if you are surveying employees. What are those key themes that they want to know? What are your leaders in the business hearing and seeing? What are some of those pain points? So that the other half, if you like, of your learning and development offering for managers becomes much more strategic. It's based year on year on the actual needs of the organisation. And if I look at what our plan looks like for the next 12 months, we are touching on some of the things like soft skills, for example. And blending that with the personalised learning paths, we're really trying to create a culture of encouraging managers and colleagues to be curious, to really invest in what we call lifelong learning, to have that desire to self-direct and find lots of the answers for themselves. Not necessarily, we have a great learning and development offering here, you know, lots of different things, lots of masterclasses and workshops and lots of online offering, but we want people to seek those opportunities out for themselves as well, and not just wait you know, for us to put in a session. So really important that they are going in and self-serving, for example, on the LMS that we use that has, you know, I think 8,000 modules available to them. When we talk about personal development plans and those personal learning paths, when we think about what is personal to the manager, so we have a continued suite of learning, but actually what is it that you need to be the most successful that you can be in your role? And some of the key themes, as I say, for this year are things like building resilience, building not only resilience for you as a line manager, because you know, it's one of the trickiest jobs in the world for definite, but also how do you create a resilient team? How do you lead and create that culture of resilience within your team? That's been really key for us right now. Leading and managing change. You know, change is the only constant, as we know, and again, this is going to be really important when it comes to our AI agenda going forward. And then some other things that again tap into what we've seen in the top priorities, but we spend a long time supporting our managers, investing in our managers in terms of wellbeing training as well. So wellbeing for them and creating that wellbeing culture within their team. So things like developing a positive mindset, we've touched on resilience already, and really looking so that we create that environment where we are supporting our colleagues, our employees, that it does become an employer of choice, because it's somewhere where people feel they can be themselves, it's somewhere that they feel that they can be supported, and it's somewhere that they feel invested in as an individual by their line manager, because there is a real commitment to learning, a commitment to the employees learning and creating that protected time, placing that importance and that emphasis on learning, but also investing into their own learning so that there is that absolute lead by example as well. So in summary, I think, as I said, it kind of falls into two camps. It's looking at those fundamentals. What are the core things that set your managers up for success, that allow them to be the best on the day-to-day basis when it comes to leading and managing their teams, but also supporting managers in what is an ever-changing landscape as well, and being able to be reactive, fluid, flexible in your approach to that. And the third thing I would say is there is always a real great temptation to want to do it all. You know, we get pulled into lots of different meetings, into lots of different ideas and strategies, and could we do this and could we do that? And there's always that temptation to go, of course we can absolutely help you with that. But I think what I've learned over the years, and it's sometimes been a really painful journey, is actually really just to focus on those top key things that are really going to have the biggest impact in your organisation, and to do those things really, really well, to get them embedded, to get them become part of the culture that you want to create. Molly, I'll pass back to you.
That was great. Thank you so much, Helen. Really, really great stuff there. And I think important to hear about creating that culture of continuous learning and development as well for our managers, and you know, not just focusing on that training for new managers, but yeah, creating that culture of continuous learning, really important. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're now going to move on to our fifth and final headline for today, which is determining how people are rewarded is up for debate. So we asked the question, how does performance impact pay decisions? And it was really intriguing actually to see how much of a mixed bag the responses were for this one. So 31% of businesses don't link performance to pay. However, the same number of businesses do determine an increase in salary based on performance. and just shy of a quarter of businesses said that their employees receive a bonus that is linked to team or company performance. So Patrick, a couple of questions really for you here. First up, why don't some businesses link pay to performance? And also, what are the benefits of linking pay to performance?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Really interesting report about pay. I think it was very, very insightful when you look at the variety of different options there and the kind of needs of the businesses. And I think that's what it reflects. I think every business is different, and having a variety of options fits different businesses. I think if you focus on the first part of that question you've just asked, like why don't some businesses link performance to pay? That no one size fits all. There is a variety of organisations out there, as you know, and especially the people joined today, that it might just not work. It may not be reflective upon their employees. It might actually because it's an administrative burden. When you have pay reviews and pay links to those types of conversations, they have to be structured. They have to be done fairly on time. And then that limits sometimes flexibility to retain staff. Some organisations and people managers want to have that option to reward people in the way they see fit. So having those type of linked discussions, especially in terms of pay, it can sort of be restrictive as well. When you talk about linking it to pay performance, it provides obviously sometimes a fairer metric of reviewing employees. It focuses on the targets of the business, and that alignment reduces that kind of ambiguity in terms of what people are going to receive. But I think just kind of taking a little bit of a divergent twist on this, what you really see is that bottom one there, impact and non-monetary reward and pay reviews, and you're thinking, or other. It seems there's probably a potential here about organisations looking at how they reward their people outside of pay as well. There is a wider set of things to look at in terms of being an employer of choice and focusing now on a package of benefits rather than just financial payments. A lot of kind of variety can be found in terms of the benefits you provide, if that is going above and beyond for different types of maternity, paternity pay, if you're focusing on providing such kind of vouchers for or discounts for local supermarkets or providers. Those type of different variety of methods, I think, really give a broader choice, and it seems to be probably underutilized in a lot of wider organizations. I think there's always been a focus about performance and pay because it's pay when you think of money, and that in itself there causes the kind of raises those types of questions about, is there other ways to reward our employees for doing, being a top performer or being fantastic? And I think, just like linking that to Helen's point about the quality of investment you can provide, it doesn't have to be that kind of, investment in terms of that, the bottom line. It can be the qualifications you provide, the apprenticeships, the masterclasses, those types of things all add into that kind of total reward statement employees receive. And I think some organizations are tackling that. Again, that the challenge is there again, admin. Is it going to cost to incentivize these employees through qualifications? But I think, when you're looking at organizations as a whole, you're always going to find you probably need a little bit of options rather than just one approach. And I think if you think about some organizations out there which are very targeted driven, so if you think of some sales linked businesses, those things are always going to be needed as well. Having that kind of competitive edge to grow your organization is just as important commercially as providing those wider kind of softer or qualification skills around that. So yeah, so it's an interesting thing. I think one of the other just kind of key highlight I'd like to focus on is performance linked to pay scales. Again, it's quite it's quite low in the market there at 10%. Again, that is kind of a big question for lots of organizations at the moment. Do we be more transparent of those types of queries we get about performance? You will see on job boards out there, there's always the question that always appears again and again on LinkedIn is why don't we discuss salary before when advertising a job? And those types of kind of taboo nature about pay. I think by tackling it a bit more holistically, and you're looking at not just this as one option, looking at it as a multiple option in your arsenal as a, you know, as a people manager, I think applying that in the right areas of the business can work well. Again, you have to be clear about how you're implementing that and just being as transparent as possible. When it links to, you know, performance and pay, you know, if you're looking at that as a directive, you know, you have to be very clear on the metrics you use, or you risk, you know, decisions of being, you know, discriminatory or biased against certain employees. So yeah, so it's quite a rounded results, as Molly said. But I think there's, you know, I think the key takeaway would be there is look at your organisation, review what areas it would fit well and how it would apply, but don't maybe retain yourself to one option. You know, again, while it may cause an administrative burden in some areas, I think every employee wants a bit of flexibility to be able to grow their organisation and manage it accordingly. You know, it's not always black and white, as we know. I just want to hand that back to Molly. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you to all of our panelists for some really insightful information there. And it's great to hear how everything kind of interlinks and intertwines as well. So we are going to move into the question and answers section of the webinar now. So just bear with me a moment while I bring the chat box up. And if you would like to start popping your questions in, that would be great. Also, if you could, if you would like a particular panelist to answer your question, if you could just pop their name next to your question, that would be perfect. Thank you. Okay, so first question for Anthony. In terms of leadership, Anthony, how do you balance empathy and authority as a leader?
Thanks, Molly. I don't really use authority much, very sparingly in emergency situations, I think. I think everyone will be familiar with the concept of flexing your leadership style to a situation. I feel, for me, and everybody's different obviously, but for me, what always works the best is trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes, which I guess is ultimately empathy, listening and reflecting on what they're saying. It gives you context, and it also often allows you to reflect on just how intense everybody's lives are, both outside work and inside of work. So putting that kind of total context around someone and what they're trying to achieve and what help they're asking for is always really important before diving into the matter at hand. So that would be my advice.
Great, thank you, Anthony. We have one here about employee engagement. So how can we benchmark our employee engagement survey results against industry standards? I'm not sure if Sarah, you wanted to take that one, or someone else.
Sure. So I guess, you know, if we take EMPS, it's going to range from a -100 to a +100, and you're going to be somewhere, you know, in between those. Looking online, you know, you can see that there's rules of thumb as to what's a good score, you know, +10 to +30, some might say +20, others might say a score of +50 to 70 is great. But I think ultimately I would be more focused on, you know, what is it today in our business, and what are realistic, achievable goals for us to achieve within the business to address the specifics of our employees and their needs, as opposed to just, you know, industry. Don't know, Patrick, you might have anything from your side.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's that point about, you know, focusing on what most HR teams will have a really good gauge of what kind of topics and themes are arising in their own business. And I think using the data, what they receive for themselves first, I think is the kind of key part. And then benchmarking, you know, they'll want to address and should want to address those things what maybe surprise them, or maybe, you know, maybe back up those thoughts and feelings they may have considered already. And yes, you know, you can look at a wider range of things of online to kind of gauge a sense of where it should be. But I think starting with maybe what you have by utilising the evidence in the survey and building kind of a framework from there to increase those scores.
Great, thank you both. So one surrounding performance and pay, do you think that salary banding should be transparent across all organisations?
I'll take that one. I think, you know, we're at a stage where I think I just mentioned, you know, more organisations are, you know, considering these salary bandings. I think if you look at us, one of the kind of positives from that would be is equitable pay. If you're looking to introduce these bandings within your business, you will find that you're moving towards that stronger goal of providing equal pay across the organisation. It sort of removes that taboo of conversations around salary increases and how they're kind of measured. And I think, you know, even in, you know, still very much in the industry, as I mentioned, asking for salary at certain points feels, you know, you may feel uncomfortable. And again, I can take it from personal experience I have, and, you know, in my past, and you question things in HR for individuals or yourself and go, you feel that maybe this is the right time, it's the right question. So yeah, I think if you are going to, you know, introduce something, that's a great positive, you know, about providing that transparency. And then it provides a clear framework for progression. You know, your colleagues and employees are going to feel there is a wider growth in that business, and they're determined to share. And again, it echoes those type of, you know, kind of reduction in bias across the organisation. So it's clear for everyone to see, and everyone can be held accountable to it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Patrick. Okay, that is all the questions that we have got time for today. So just a few little bits from me before we fully wrap up today. So there are 10 more headline stats that are waiting for you in the full report. So I am going to send the link to the full report to everyone in the webinar follow-up email later this afternoon. Alternatively, you can quite easily find it in our Knowledge Centre as well, which is on our website. And speaking of our Knowledge Centre, for more insights, including guides, webinars and advice articles for payroll and HR professionals, please visit our Knowledge Centre, which you can find on our website. It's honestly jam-packed with resources, and everything is free to download as well. So please do take advantage of our Knowledge Centre. And finally, if you would like to find out more about our HR and employment law services, please drop a message into the Q&A panel and one of my colleagues will get in touch with you. Our HR advice line runs 24/7, 365 days a year. So no matter when an HR issue crops up, best practice employment law advice is always available over the phone, anytime, delivered by our highly experienced team of qualified experts. Now, before we finish, you will see a prompt to fill out a poll when we close the webinar. And we're just looking for some opinions and insights to help tailor our research, resources and content for our listeners and readers. So if you have got a few spare seconds at the end to complete that poll, then we'd really appreciate it. So that is everything from us today. Everyone who's attended, as I say, will receive a recording of the webinar and a copy of the slides, along with a link to our What's Hot in HR report. Thank you so much to our fantastic panellists, Anthony, Patrick, Sarah and Helen. You've been absolutely wonderful. And thank you so much to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. I really hope you found this session useful, and I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you so much.